Joel, welcome to the Invisible Path. How are you, man?
Patrick, doing great, man. How are you doing?
Good. So two things. I don't know what the second one's going to be, but the first one is we now have enough videos on YouTube that I just want to mention that it's there. You can see Joel's beautiful background today, which is worth it. So if you haven't found out that we have videos on YouTube and they are starting to kind of get some attention, they're out there. We put all these on YouTube as well, so you can find them. You can find them if you want to watch us. If you want to see our ugly mugs, that's an option for you, or you can keep these words coming in your ears. Real quick. There's two questions that were sent in. The first one, super simple, comes from Dave. I'm going to read this because it's not the first time I've been asked this question. When will the shirts be available? So there's a picture of me in a Becoming Legendary shirt. I did those, I don't know, I did those a while ago. There are none left. Maybe in the future we'll do those again. If you really want a Becoming Legendary shirt, and as Joel's called out, there's a certain level of pretentiousness to wearing it. There's also a certain level of non-pretentiousness to wearing it, because you're not saying I am legendary. You're saying, hey, I'm trying to walk down that path. So if you really are interested in those, reach out. If there's enough interest, we'll get those printed again. The real question, though, this came in from Jess. I was listening to episode 5, and it made me wonder, how far from enlightenment do you think you are? And Joel, I'll let you go first on that one, because that's a big question.
Miles. I mean, you should, I don't know. I'm trying more and more to just accept it all. I think.
Yeah.
I think when I was younger, I wanted to attain something, get somewhere, have some sort of permanence when it comes to some kind of leveling up. But the older I get, it just seems like, well, let the thing flow and be grateful and be aware when things are going well. Have some gratitude for that, and recognize that that isn't always going to last, and that you're going to, or at least me, I'm going to get caught up in all sorts of nonsense and head loops and little traps in the mind, and that's part of the whole game, and I'm not going to get out of that. I didn't get that roll of the dice, and I'm just cool with that now. It's like, whatever. I'm not that good. That's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
I'm not even working towards that anymore. I'm not even trying.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I was gonna say how I'm at 0 or whatever the furthest away is possible. But I think in your answer there's a little grain of like hope in that, right? Where it's like, oh, here are some things that I have recognized about myself. So once you've recognized a few things about yourself, you've moved away from 0 at least, and moving away from 0 is probably what most of us are going to achieve in our lifetime. So yeah, a long ways away with not a so I would say the same thing. You know, I'm not searching. I'm not currently on that path, right? Like that is not a path that I'm headed down, that I have interest in heading down. Maybe someday that'll change. Maybe I'll get hit by a bolt of lightning or something. But for now, it'll just be me.
Maybe it's just that every day that we get closer to just dropping the meat suit and checking out, that's how much further you get towards that state, right? So,
yeah. And there is a lot of talk within people who are conscious and aware about the enlightenment that does come at the end, right? There's some interesting studies about chemical responses within the body and how different those are as we run out of time. So who knows? Maybe everyone ends up enlightened in their own special way.
Yeah, I sort of have this strange feeling that, like, regardless of how good or how just deplorable you were as a human, maybe in the end, everyone, like, I'm not saying this is how it is, but everyone just sort of, I can envision this, right? Everyone ends up, whatever, in the afterlife, and you all sort of still have some sort of identity from what you were on this planet. And people look around and just like, my God, like, Hitler, what the hell were you thinking? Why were you doing that? And he was like, oh, what was that? What happened? Like, what if everyone arrives at the same place?
Yeah.
And then there is this just like pure understanding of like, wow, I really got caught up in some bizarre stuff there. Sorry about that, everybody. Who knows? And of course, this is an example that makes no one happy. So I have to throw it out there. But yeah, I don't know.
It is, but it should make it. There is, okay. Whatever the most whoever, put the person who you think is the most horrible thing, has done the most horrible things ever, put that person in that experience, right? And that they have this realization and this awareness, and then also understand that in that space, everyone would also like say, hey, that's okay, like, we forgive you for that, we get it. Glad that you're now in this new place where we all just love one another.
Who the heck knows? Yeah. We'll have to save that one for a different episode, because I don't think we're going to be able to get anywhere right now with that.
Okay, so to transition into the topic, I want to start with a quote from H.G. Wells, which is, civilization is a race between education and catastrophe. And the topic this week is catastrophe. No, it's education.
Wait, that's catastrophe. Depending. Yeah.
Depending. Yeah.
That's a great
I thought that was a very interesting quote. It is a very interesting place to start this conversation. And I want to turn over a question to you to kind of jump in. Are there any moments in your educational career that are like remarkably stand out, good or bad?
Oh, of course.
I think everyone probably has them.
Yeah. So first of all, let me just hit on that quote for a second. Let me touch on that. So I mean, that really speaks to like the power of our imagination and our creativity and what we're capable of. And I'm sure that's where that quote came from, with a particular context towards world wars and conflict and technological advancement that's in a terrifying realm, like atom bombs and all that. So can we keep up with our moral advancement and with our education, so that the darker sides of humanity don't just blow everything to hell? And so let's see, education. So I wear glasses now. I didn't wear glasses when I was in second grade. The first time I was in second grade, I sat in the back of the class. I couldn't see the chalkboard. I didn't know why I couldn't see the chalkboard. No one helped me understand why I couldn't see the damn chalkboard. And so I ended up taking second grade again for this reason. And the the absolute, it's so fascinating, like the Lord of the Flies scenarios, the bullying, everything. It's so shaping, like the shame that can get foisted on you as a kid within the education system. All that stuff is fascinating. It all goes back to like that Pink Floyd song, Another Brick in the Wall. Like it's very much like that as well. It's like there can be a lot of shame is a great tool to motivate kids, for sure. Kids can be ruthless to each other, ruthless. So that was like a formative thing for me, I think, for education. But then I'd say the opposite end of that would probably be college, going to this ridiculous hippie liberal arts school that was great. It was on a 1,000-acre forested campus, and um, that's that was a fantastic rite of passage in a lot of ways. And I learned to master at least one thing there, which was mushroom identification. very, very useful in the real world, right? Probably also learned how to read. And, you know, I don't even think my prefrontal cortex was very well developed at that point, but still, it was still useful. And I still got some sort of foundation in maybe attempting to think critically. So those are two opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to my educational experiences.
Yeah. So I think that piece of critically thinking and how that either plays or doesn't play within education is an important piece. I think if you roll back to that quote, you know, civilization is a race, what you kind of said, between understanding and catastrophe. Because if you educate people from the start poorly, or you educate them down a path that leads to catastrophe, then education is not the opposite of catastrophe. It's the end of it's the means to get to the end, which is catastrophe, right? So education can, depending on what education is, it can be a lot of things. I mean, if you were educated under the SS regime, then you could have a very different moral standing within the world, depending on what the ideas that were collectively kind of gathered by your brain are. So as we kind of roll into the foundation of education, and you think about where education came from and the system that we are still operating under, it really formalized education started essentially around the Industrial Revolution. And the Industrial Revolution education system was to create workers. And we really haven't deviated all that far away from that education pattern. Now, as you mentioned, you may find yourself in some liberal arts school in the forest and luck out and learn critical thinking. But for the most part, critical thinking isn't really shared. I remember walking into a anthropology 101 class and walking in with a stack of textbooks that was like yay high, about a foot tall, and sitting down first day, and Professor Craig T. Palmer looking at everyone and saying, hey, here's what we're going to do for this semester. We're going to go through these things, and you are going to find what's wrong with these studies. And that concept was so mind-blowing to me, that we weren't going to just look at these doctrines as the gospel. We were going to look at these things as pieces of human creation that could be flawed in many, many ways. So taking that idea of critical thinking out of education, kind of thinking about the way we start our education career, which is essentially penmanship, arithmetic, and some form of usually history, U.S. governance. What do you think is valuable? What do you think is valuable in that early primary? Where's the value in that early primary schooling?
You know, I think one of the main things you learn is I mean, even more fundamental to that whole process, the whole modern education process, is learning how to sit in a room and do something that someone else tells you to do for whatever it is, 6 hours a day, 8 hours a day. Learning to see that there's someone else in charge, there's a schedule, you will follow the schedule, and learning that there are punishments for when you deviate from what the authority figure wants from you. And you know, there are obviously some good things about that as well, but I think that's so fundamental to this whole thing. And your mention of of the roots of our modern education experiment. Really, it's like 100-year long experiment so far, and I think it was called like the normal school back in the day. This was, they wanted to normalize the teachers, normalize the curriculum, normalize the students, so that everyone could tolerate a factory environment for the Industrial Revolution. And so, it's tough. I don't even know what to say about the value of some of that stuff. Some of it depends on the temperament of the kids. I mean, some kids, some educators say maybe you should just let kids be feral until a certain age. Maybe they're far too young, when you're starting preschool, kindergarten, all that. And so I think there's so many different philosophies of education out there that are interesting, different models of how you look at people. Like, are kids just little human adults and that's what you need to treat them as? How is it that you treat them? It's a fascinating question. I don't have a good answer for that, but I mean, we're sort of like fish when it comes to education. Like, education is water, and we don't really know any other way. We haven't really thought of it. We just sort of drop into the prescribed routine and path that's put in front of us, and you go through the steps.
Yeah.
First grade, second grade, then you graduate, then you go to college and get in debt, and then you're wondering what you're going to do with your life after that once you finally sort of come out of all this.
So really interesting. A remarkable amount of the education that has historically occurred in India is that feral system, right? It is, hey, kids are going to be kids. I think it's 12, but it might be 14 before they really start a formal education. And during that time, during that preschool time, actual preschool, before school, not school that happens before school, but before you actually get into school.
Oh, that's great. I never thought of it that way.
There is, your goal is to learn to socialize and to connect with humans and be a child, like explore, like do all those things. And I find that idea really fascinating. And when we look at, how math and science and how much mental capacity is coming out of the Indian continent right now, they're certainly not lacking for traditional education, right? I mean, the amount of engineers coming out of India and going global is absolutely insane. It is a remarkable thing. I think this kind of goes back into this really interesting idea, which is we have blended the idea of academic ability and intelligence. And we think that we've created this idea, specifically here in America, that academic ability is the exact same thing as intelligence. And really, when you think about test taking, there's so much deductive reasoning that is involved in test taking. If you're a remarkably good deductive reasoner, you have a significant advantage in academic ability that may have nothing to do with your intelligence. And on the other side, you may be in a place starting out from a very early age where you can't see the chalkboard, right? Or you're just not interested in what's going on. I was essentially failing out of high school until my first semester of my junior year. And my parents had me pulled out of class and tested to see if I needed to get into special education classes. And upon that test, that came back and they were like, hey, he's testing off the charts for this experience. And that actually made my parents more upset with me because they could not understand why I had the intellectual capability to get grades, but I wasn't doing it. And it was just like, what is wrong with this kid? And the thing that turned me around wasn't getting glasses. it was getting picked on by a teacher. So a teacher was like, hey, the thing that teachers do where they call on someone who they don't think is going to get the right answer, just to call out the fact that this person's not paying attention. And a teacher did that, but the question was about logic. It was like, we were trying to find the density of chalk, and the question was something along the lines like, would it matter if you weighed the chalk before or after it was soaked in water? And that was a question of logic to me. It was like, well, yeah, obviously, if you soak chalk in water, it's going to get heavier, so we're going to have a different density ratio. And after I answered that question, this girl turned to me and she was like, hey, I didn't know you were that smart. And from that moment on, I got straight A's in school. All I needed was a little bit of attention from the female species, and I was a completely different student. I realized, oh, if getting good grades I was getting bad grades because I thought that was the way to get attention. But if getting good grades is the way to get attention, this is the easiest thing in the world. Like, I can do this anytime I want. And I think that moment is really impactful for me because it showed this facade of education. Like, my teachers prior to that moment would have told you I was not going to be able to do much in my life because I was doing nothing in school. And post that moment, I don't think people would have recognized those two different people, and it came from one 10-second conversation.
That is so interesting. Yeah, motivation. Motivation is crazy important.
Yes.
Your parents must have been happy after that. It remind. Yeah, I was a very mediocre student in high school until senior year. It was really late, and I realized, oh, I guess maybe I'd like to go to college. I should probably try to do better. And so I just got straight A's throughout the senior year. But I don't know. It's interesting. Yeah, there's certainly like a different maturity level. People come online sort of at different times. But what you mentioned reminds me of this saying that like the C students end up hiring the A students and the B students, right? Yeah. So there are different different types of ability out there. It's not just about the IQ, it's about the EQ as well, the emotional.
Sure. Absolutely.
And so trying to do what you can to round out your students, round out your kids, whatever it is, whoever you're interacting with, or just round yourself out to see your own, where you might be deficient, where it is you might want to add an additional skill or something to get you where you want to go. I mean, I think we're doing this topic, we're covering this topic because it's so obvious that the current system is not keeping up with how fast things are advancing. One thing I'll say though, before I'm sure we'll just end up, whatever, criticizing the current system a bunch. One thing I'll say though is I work with an engineer who's from China. He's born and raised in China, and he came to the United States, and we were talking about education here versus there. And there's always this propaganda put out in the US of like, look at these Chinese students, look at all the drills they're doing, look at how intelligent they are, and we're not keeping up in America, right? And his position is that the kids in China are not learning how to think for themselves whatsoever. They're only learning drills. They're only learning memorization. And this is just what he has seen in his experience and in his own sort of thinking when he was just embedded in the Chinese system. And so it's not all doom. It's not all gloom. I think there's a lot of hope for if you're in America or whatever, the Western world, it's okay. You're better off than you think. But it's so, I mean, we've gotten in this position now. I think what's so interesting is like student debt is just a mess, right? Educational debt. And the reason why college is so expensive now is because of student loans. This is a fascinating thing that people don't understand. But if you make a loan that's guaranteed by the government, where you make the loan, you know you're going to get your money back, then as an institution, you're going to raise your prices. You're going to let in whoever you want, because those kids you're letting in to your institution are just cash cows at that point.
Yep.
And Yale, Harvard, these schools actually used to be quite affordable. If you go back and look at the inflation adjusted cost of them, a year's worth of tuition was a few months of work at the Ford factory making Model Ts. And so it's a total mess now. So now this has people wondering, what's the point in this system unless I want to be a lawyer, a doctor, something that needs that piece of paper? What am I going to do? Or what are my kids going to do, right? Whoever it is you're thinking about. And so this has us looking for alternatives for sure.
So I think you're right about it's not all doom and gloom. I think that I can kind of go back in my world, and Craig T. Palmer was not the only person who introduced critical thinking, and I think that's really important. I also think we're in a very unique space that has advantages and disadvantages, and all things do, right? But teacher pay, specifically pre high school and below, right, is pretty terrible. I think pretty terrible is a good way to describe teacher pay. And really, educational system pay is not what it should be if you value education the way that I think we value education. And that means two things. It means likely there are a lot of people who would be incredible teachers who are passing up on that opportunity because there's not a financial reward. And that's a downside. On the plus side, it means that there are people who get involved in education who are there for only the right reason. Like there are people who are there because they have this like deep rooted passion and desire to be beneficial to young humans forming themselves. And that's not everyone. It's definitely not everyone. And there are people that don't get involved because it's not the right spot. But there are really good people who are involved in education. And I think, as critical as we might be about education, I don't think it has anything to do with the people involved in education. I think that generally, I would say 90+% of the people who get involved in education did it because of the quote unquote right reason. So that I think is really important. When we're thinking about like this, what we do path and how we get involved and how we overcome this, how we open doors without certifications, right? Because the system was set up where everyone went through this primary schooling. And then again, this is back industrial revolution's time. So it's a while back, but we haven't evolved the system to match the demand of society. The system was everyone went through this primary school, you got ready to work. And then a very small percentage of people were expected to go on to this higher education. And now, like, I don't know about you, but did you ever not think you were going to go to college? Was it the senior year when you realized you were going to go to college, or was that just kind of a thing you knew was going to happen?
It was just an assumption. It was a cultural assumption that I would do that. Yeah. I think school probably, I don't know. I mean, it's obviously designed for that middle of the bell curve, and that's who it has to treat. And people that are lagging behind or that are really advanced, they're not going to be served well in that system. Yeah. The teachers, even if they are passionate, they end up in the school and they realize, oh, I have to, in most schools at least, I have to teach to this curriculum. Yep. Because the kids have to pass a test. Because if they don't pass this test that the state administers, then the school is at risk of losing funding.
Yep.
If I take, I'm already getting paid poorly. I'm already kind of, not in a financially good place potentially. And so if I take any risks, who actually has my back for me to take
Yep.
risks and do anything sort of interesting with the kids? There's a lot of challenges, I think, for any sort of teachers that want to push any type of boundaries or do anything unique within the typical school out there. And so that's a bit of a drag, right? You need to figure, and so you need to figure out, well, the person that's being educated, yourself, a family member, whatever, where are they? What can they benefit from? I think self-awareness is a really key thing. I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about maybe some alternatives to college. Those probably aren't for everybody. Like, I don't know if I was mentally or emotionally mature enough to do a whole lot more than college. Maybe I would have if there would have been other options. It seemed like it was really the only option available. That was the track. I wasn't paying attention to anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably the way it is for most people. They're just not paying attention.
I had that exact same experience. There's almost zero variance in the way I would describe that experience for me. And I think it's likely true for a lot of people, because it's also hard to think about. I mean, shoot, if you're an 18-year-old and you're capable of thinking 30 years down the line in your life, you probably are not someone who needs college. Like you probably have figured more things out than I'm ever going to figure out at 18. So congratulations to that. But I think for the rest of us, we get done with high school and we just look around and say, what am I supposed to do? Like, I'm supposed to be an adult now. I'm not. I don't feel like an adult. Like, I don't. It's just I'm just a kid. And college really, it becomes like an extension of being a kid in a lot of ways, because you are still going to this schooling thing. You still have this kind of like unique position of being. Most people are uniquely positioned in a way. Well, you can't buy alcohol, right? So there's still right restrictions on you. You're uniquely positioned. I think once you do go to college, for most people, it's almost like folding back into the family. It's like I'm not quite ready to leave the nest. I'm leaving the nest, but in the summer I'm probably going to come home, at least for the first 2 years. And it's like kind of a testing ground for leaving. But now it's also like a $50,000 a year testing ground, and or significantly more. And sure, there are options that are less, but man, not that much less. So I would say it's a very expensive way to test your wings these days, and that is a pretty good problem. When we roll back to the thing that you said about teaching to standardized testing, I think that is more or less an agreed upon kind of goal of the current educational system. In order to really operate in the current educational system, that essentially has to be the thing. Kids have to be able to pass tests that are standardized, and et cetera, et cetera. And in order to make that happen, you have to be able to teach to pass those tests. What do you think the goal of education should be?
Let me get out a quote from Alan Watts. This is great.
All right.
So we've moved towards certification, and climbing up this ladder. So yeah, let me read this. The reward for studying French should be the ability to speak French and enjoy reading French and having fun with French people. But when you get a degree, for it, then the degree becomes the point. And so, I mean, this is really where we've found ourselves, that essentially the educational institutions have become gatekeepers, and that if you don't have that piece of paper, life can become much more challenging. but at the same time, the piece of paper is becoming less and less valuable these days.
More expensive and less valuable.
Yes, yes. And so like I like the word scholar. The word scholar means to like be of leisure, to have a life of leisure, something like that. Education used to be for sort of like the fun of it, for curiosity, for discovery. Education used to be, in fact, sort of like a secret society. Like it was when you think about alchemy and then later metallurgy, these were like to figure out how to take ore out of the ground and turn that into metal. This was not something that where it was like, yeah, give us some money and we'll teach you how to do this. This was like secret knowledge that was closely and carefully guarded, because this was like, back then that technology was somewhere between like a useful thing and magic. I mean, it was just like the most this and make this useful material that you just got somehow out of the ground. And so the occult, the original sort of occult nature of education, I think is an interesting one. And now we've moved towards something so mundane, so boring. I mean, I think about like with my own kids, if I want to motivate them, the last thing I do is tell them that they'll be learning something from what they're doing, because school has like hosed them in that way so hard. And so you need to find a more intrinsic, a better motivator. Sometimes it's just money. Like with my kids, it's like, well, okay, I'd like you to learn some stuff over the summer. I'd like you to learn how to type. I'd like you to watch some random TED Talks. How about if you type for 15 minutes a day and you watch a TED Talk every day? Then I give you a little bit of money for that.
Yeah.
And that works like nothing else. It really does. And that motivation will change later, I'm sure. But and it's just like anything, like probably the same thing, like the kids who really wanted to learn to play guitar. What was their motivation? Well, they saw some older kid who could play guitar and they saw all the girls around him, you know, and that was it, right? Just like you, that was the motivation. So we find ourselves in a strange place where we have really lost the plot on why we should learn anything at all. And we've reduced it down just to certification and a system of one-upsmanship where, well, you've got to get your high school diploma and then you've got to go to college because your high school diploma is useless. And then everyone has a BA or a BS, so that's useless. So you've got to get your master's. And most people have a master's. So why don't you get a PhD so that you can be totally ruined? I mean, you work with PhDs. You work with PhDs, they're just, some of them, they're just different. They've been so warped by that experience. They're a totally different type of animal.
Yes.
Anyways, that's a rant about education and where we're at.
I think it's very important though. You know, there's two things. So I'll take this back to episode 5, which is where our question from Jess came from. It was on gurus. And Sadhguru is a guy I talk about a lot. And he repeats over and over that his only striving in life is to remain uneducated. So Sad means uneducated. So his name that he has taken on is uneducated guru. And he talks about how the intellect is only capable of dissecting. The intellect only peels things apart and separates. And really, when you think about putting things in your head, they do create. The more educated we are, the more separated we are. And that's just like a general thing. And if you look culturally, the more educated a culture is, the more separated it is, the more fences it has, the more guardians between communication there are. And that's just, it's a very interesting thing that is true. And it takes us back to a thing you said about the value of EQ, emotional intelligence. And I have never encountered any portion of any education that I've gone through that had anything to do with emotional intelligence. And that is starting from 0 on up. And really, if I think about what is the most valuable skill set in life, it's that. That is the thing that will get you further, that will open more doors. Sure, you can't become a doctor on emotional intelligence. That's not going to happen in America. There are places where you can do that, right? Like if you look at cultural societies and humans, the witch doctor, the shaman, that was the person who held the fabric of society, of these small societies together. When there was conflict, when there's conflict in a tribe situation, you go to the witch doctor, you go to the shaman, and they're the one who has the solution. We've created a different formulation of doctor in America, and you can argue if that's better or worse. And I think you can legitimately argue if it's better or worse. There are pluses and minuses, like there are in all things. But the fact that emotional intelligence is missing from the formal education system, and it's just kind of like, hey, we're gonna put you all in a room together, so you're gonna figure it out, is a huge gaping hole in the education system to me. Do you see that same hole? Did you experience any emotional intelligence training, teaching in your education?
God, of course not. I mean, they want you. They're just training you to be a factory worker, right? And that's a fascinating thing. And what you, it's it's interesting how people, like kids that were raised in a family where, let's say the family's ultra wealthy and they have a bunch of businesses and whatever, those kids obviously they have a higher chance of going on to take over the family business or whatever and just be successful. I think part of that sure is access, but part of that is education from the parents and from the family that happens outside of the education system. I mean, we're not robots, but essentially we're treated as interchangeable parts that can be, placed into a corporate role, some kind of, business role. And then, they spin you around for however many years. And then when they're done with you, they can replace you with a new cog.
Yep.
And it's interesting how incrementally they just keep it just is ratcheted up more and more. I just see the pressure starting in elementary school and middle school to prepare for college. And it's like, this is just a preposterous notion at this point in my mind. Like, I think about some of the like, all you have to do is just Google. If you don't want to, if you've got someone who's going to be going into college, or you're thinking about this for your own kids or yourself or whatever, you could just Google alternatives to college. You would find all sorts of fascinating things out there. I mean, college doesn't even prepare you very well. I remember this one podcaster talking about how he went to school, I think it was in the 80s or 90s. He went to like a prestigious school for computer science. He got into a low-level programming job, and he knew nothing. And the company that hired him, they sent him to this remedial programming class so he could actually get up to speed. So he went to four-year college for a specialized thing at a prestigious university that specialized in that discipline, and it got him nowhere. And so this is why, like, Google is making their own curriculum now. You can just get certified by Google, and then they'll hire you if you want to do that. But there's so many other things out there, like getting back to the EQ, there's so many other things out there you can do if you're willing to challenge yourself. I mean, if you there's this guy, Doug Casey, hilarious rascal of an author and thinker, and he talks about how if you want, like, if you actually thought about your life, okay, here's an interesting model. So first of all, you have to have some self-awareness of who you are, what it is you want. And if instead of going to college, if you thought to yourself, okay, I'd like to learn these 3 skills, whatever they are. So maybe those are hands-on skills. Like, I would like to know how to build a house from the ground up. You can go somewhere and you can learn that. There are places where you can take a 6 or an 8 week course, and you and a bunch of other people learn how to build a house. Maybe you'd like to learn ceramics or a different language or cooking or ballroom dancing or whatever it is you'd like to learn, or maybe it is computer programming, some different disciplines. What if you decided to take uh, essentially take up apprenticeships? This is an older model, right? Take an
Yeah,
apprenticeship
absolutely.
and actually find out where it is you want to learn this thing. Maybe it's where that thing is done best and where it's taught best. Go there, wherever that
Yeah,
is on the planet. Go to a different country, embed yourself into a completely different environment that's foreign to you. Learn that thing for a couple months, and then go somewhere else and do that with some other discipline. If
yeah,
you did that and learned just three different things over the course of a year, let's say, after that year, the difference between you being a year out of high school versus someone who just went to college for a year and they're done with their freshman year and are about to go back home and live with mom and dad. The difference between those two kids and those two paths is night and day. You have so
yeah,
many different things to talk about. You've had so many different experiences. Maybe
yeah.
you even have some street smarts too, because you had to go to some different countries and interact with different people and be challenged. I mean, you don't learn anything about street smarts and about sort of the dangers out there in the world. And
Mm-hmm.
you don't learn anything about emotional intelligence whatsoever. They don't want you
Mm-hmm.
to know that. I really don't think they do. And they sure as
Mm-hmm.
hell aren't going to teach you anything about money either, except how to get in debt.
Mm-hmm. Apprenticeship is an interesting idea. You know, it's such a part of human history. There are very few industries that still kind of apply the model. I'm curious as you say that, because one of the industries that I know still has like a dualistic approach is the culinary industry. You know, you could become a chef as an apprentice, or you can become a chef by going through a culinary institute. And I wonder how that's impacted the rising costs of culinary arts. I wonder if they have not increased at the same level as other educational systems. I bet that's likely true. Because why you know, it was a thing that I thought about in my life. Um, and apprentice, why would you not go through something, learn from someone that you know, that's going to care about what you produce because it also represents them, and you get paid to do it? Why would you not take that path if you wanted to get into the culinary arts? It seems ludicrous to me to be like, nah, I'd rather go to a school, pay money, and hope for the best. There are people that do it. I'm sure there's reasons why they do it. But the apprenticeship model is really interesting because it also it solves, or it allows for a solve, not doesn't necessarily solve, but it allows for a solve of that teacher pay thing, right? Because then the most successful teachers would be the most sought after from students, and they would be getting compensated based upon their ability. And there, you can really apply apprenticeship to any single profession. You know, if we started over from scratch, or if we restarted over from scratch, and we just applied this apprenticeship model to the human race, I wonder how different things really would be. And they would be significantly different, better or worse, whatever they'd be. You can kind of apply that. What where If we did that experiment, Joel, that is a fun thought experiment. If we took that experiment and we just reerased human history and everything became an apprenticeship, is it better or worse?
It's probably dangerous to
Yeah.
try to change to try to make changes to large scale complex systems. It seems like normally the intended outcome, usually it's the opposite that happens
Yeah.
almost everywhere. So I have no idea, but this example of cooking is so interesting. I mean, you cook something, you make something, what you produce is immediately obvious. There's a really quick feedback loop there and signal for with regards to whether or not it was good or not, whether or not your work was good. And I can think of plenty of jobs, plenty of pursuits out there where the feedback loop is much slower and maybe even non-existent. I mean, there are plenty of just like complete garbage jobs out there where you know what you're doing isn't really adding a lot of value, and the system is so complex and your role in it, your part in it is so small. People really wonder if they're contributing anything at all and what meaning that even has. So you go through all this
Yeah.
schooling, and then you have this job, and you don't even see any real utility in it. But that apprenticeship model, that gets you to a place where you're having that human relationship with someone else. You're getting that emotional intelligence and that feedback, that EQ, and you're seeing the results. You're seeing the fruits of your labor in a way that maybe gives your life a little more meaning.
Yeah.
I think that's super, super important. But none of these things are really even thought about. People aren't at all.
Yeah.
They're not thinking about. People don't even have a goal. I mean, I remember maybe you take a test in high school or in college or something. Here, take this assessment, and it will tell you something about you. But I don't think people think enough about even goal setting and having like a self-assessment of like, okay, here are my temperaments. I'm an introvert. I'm an extrovert. I like to do. Here's what I might like to do in the future. What would I need to get there, right?
Yeah.
Skill wise, what would I actually need? And instead, people just go through, a typical path instead of, and like, it's not a judgment. It's just, you're young, you don't know any better. But
Yeah.
it's like the opportunities and the options need to be put out there for people. And they're not. And there's so many good things out there. The self-authoring program, the future authoring program, those are fascinating. Different exercises where you can sit down and have questions asked to you about what would you like your life to be like in the future? And then also conversely, what would you not like it to be like in the future? And if you lay those things out, and what behaviors, what things would I need to do to steer it in the direction I want it to go? What things would I need to avoid to make sure I don't fall into a rut that I don't want? That sort of intentionality, I think, is lacking. It's definitely lacking today.
Definitely lacking, and could so easily be integrated into the standardized system. That's the amazing thing. I mean, you could put in these opportunities. You could put in these opportunities for student kind of awareness, is how I would describe that, from the jump. And it could impact the way that an education, like you could create educational paths that were very personalized based upon responses to questions. And they'd be less personalized because as a 6-year-old, your responses aren't that valuable about the future. You want to be a superhero or a firefighter, and we can put you down a generalized path at that point. But I think you could create questions that you could ask an 18-year-old that would enlighten things within them that they may not be able to come to on their own. And that is a fascinating idea that offers a lot of potential insights for people. And I think you called out, there's probably a significant amount of those resources available today for people.
There's so much out there, and everything has moved towards hyper specialization. You have to get that degree in something very specialized, and that's really interesting. Like, it's what happens when you get ultra specialized is, first of all, you're totally useless in any other discipline. It means that you can get a job in a certain field for a very narrow range of specific companies that want your expertise. And beyond that, you're useless. You're a totally useless person. You're an engineer. You studied, one particular alloy or polymer or one, computer science, whatever, for this one thing. And that's it. And let's say you're getting into programming. I think this whole thing about learning to code, if you want to code, great. If you don't want to code, but your parents are like, oh yeah, or or you're the parent teaching and pressing your kid into coding. Are you kidding? Look at how many people in China and in India are learning to code right now. Like, unless you are at the top 0.01% of coders, you're just sort of like scut labor. You're just sort of like another cog in that machine. And so another thing to consider instead of like very deep knowledge is to go broader. And so if you have multiple different disciplines or fields that you have an interest in, or different skill sets, and you get to and like people like Tim Ferriss have talked about this a lot, if you get to maybe 75% or 80% proficiency in a bunch of different things, especially if they're totally different from each other, you are going to see things that no one else saw, that no one else could put together. I think of like, I don't know if I've ever mentioned this on like one of our way back episodes or not, but I think of like the company Four Sigmatic, how they do mushroom coffee, right? They do instant coffee with mushrooms in it. And I think about, and what that company did is they brought medicinal mushrooms to the public more than anybody else. And the person who should have done that was Paul Stamets, right? Because he's the mushroom guy. But he is like super good at mushrooms and the medicinal properties and all that. But he's the mushroom guy. He's the mushroom guy. But he didn't see the other piece of it, which is, how do I get this out in a way? How do I push the idea out there? And so it took someone else who had two different interests. One was mushrooms, and the other interest that the founder of Four Sigmatic had was endurance athletics. And so he paid attention to like the benefits of like cordyceps mushroom for endurance athletics, and said, oh, I'm going to combine these two things together. How is it that I make this? And he also, I think, had some business background, and maybe I think his parents did too. So how do I make this into a consumer product? And I think about that all the time. Like, the people and the companies who you would expect to make the next advancement, they won't, because they're too specialized and they're focused on this one thing. And it takes someone who has maybe less deep knowledge, but broad knowledge and a bunch of different disciplines that they can put together in a unique way. And so that's another way for people to look at this, to think about what their interests are, what their skills are, maybe what they could add to that are in totally different arenas, and then see what kind of magic comes out of that.
I think is a really, really important piece. I've never really put all of that together the way you just did. It's impacted my life significantly. I think that if you do look, it does the creating different perspectives within a single human entity offers that single human entity a lot of opportunity to put pieces of puzzles together that somebody might not be able to see. And that general kind of business is especially in our society, right? In a capitalistic society, having a general base awareness of business is so valuable, because it can be applied across essentially every discipline. Like you can make money out of anything. I will promise you can make, there are things you are throwing away today that you can make money out of. I will guarantee that. If I told you some of the things I made money off of, it would make your head explode. And I find that discipline really valuable, but then also getting into, like, if you apply a broad discipline with a specific discipline, and a specific kind of underappreciated discipline, then you start getting into really valuable areas of cross-contamination within the educational system. So that's a really good piece. And in a way, you could make an argument for some education as it being kind of this broad spectrum of awareness around different subjects. And on that, like, subject component, are there any, to kind of like draw this out a little bit more, are there any subjects within the current education system that you view as particularly valuable, that could extrapolate out into this idea that you're talking about here of cross-discipline awareness or knowledge?
My gosh, I mean, it depends so much, I think, on the specific, excuse me, the specific kid,
Yeah.
what their interests are, right? But it seems like there's so many things that if you just touched on them, if you just gave the kid a little bit of exposure to them, would be a very good thing. But I don't think they want that. It's not really an objective. The objective
For
is
sure.
it's a sales funnel to get you into college.
For sure.
So they wouldn't want to actually teach you about anything particularly useful about money or about business, and what business or making money really is in some ways, especially the way you put it before about turning ideas into money. Money is just a proxy for value. It just means that you're delivering value to people, that they find whatever solution or product you're offering to them, they find that more valuable than the money they're willing to exchange for it. And we do that all the time. And that's generally a good thing. It's a voluntary exchange. And a voluntary exchange between people is almost always a good thing. And so, and even that kind of framing of what money is and what value is never even discussed, right? I mean, and so people are not really empowered in any way. I mean, the great conspiracy here is that we're not encouraged to have a whole lot of self agency. Instead, we're just encouraged to follow the path and to go along with whatever is laid out for us, and so to break through that conspiracy, to actually figure out what it is you want to do for yourself, and to take some personal responsibility there, and to push in a different direction. And maybe that doesn't mean you have to just, it doesn't have to be binary. You can do both. If you need to follow the conventional path, you can do that. But you're probably not going to master anything in college unless you do it in spite of college. You'd have to do it on the side almost. And so, and that takes real discipline, right? That takes some commitment. And that, I think, is something that is a message that's lacking, that you're going to have to, it's going to be beneficial to you in the long run, for your soul, for your dignity, to take some self-responsibility and to really think about this whole thing critically, and think about what it is that you want and where that might be different from the path that's laid out before you by the culture.
It's pretty amazing that I inadvertently did that in college. So I was a film and TV production major. I was a film and TV production major for no other reason than it sounded fun. And what that meant for me is there's not a lot of homework in film and TV production, right? Like you don't need to, you're not studying a lot. I was studying none. But what it allowed me to do is be exploratory with my real education. And I would attend classes all the time that I was not enrolled in, because I found them fascinating. And professors would always ask why I wasn't enrolled in them. And because I wanted to learn this stuff. I didn't need the stress associated with like being involved in that major. I didn't need the stress of having to test on these things. I just wanted to collect and gather the information. And that I took a full year's worth of classes studying the fishing industry in Newfoundland, the cod fishing industry of Newfoundland, that I wasn't enrolled in. And that has turned out to be some of the most valuable information that I have ever encountered, because it was all about understanding collective commons and how you deal with shared resources among humans. And man, there's some real value in what you described, and I lucked into that. and I don't know, like, one thing is you could just go, like, you can just attend college courses. I mean, a lot of the Ivy League schools are now putting stuff online, so you can just do that online, but you can go in person too. You're not going to get kicked out of a class. So if you're really interested in learning, there are lots and lots of ways to do that that are involved in the traditional system. And then, as Joel's mentioned, there are lots and lots of ways outside of the traditional education system where you're not locked in and where you're not put in debt, and the knowledge and the awareness and the experiential component is still there and valuable. So with that like piece of brilliance by Joel of like, hey, you can go through a formal education, you can do that, but likely you're going to need to expand whatever discipline you chose in order for certainly to create this broad spectrum awareness of different interdisciplines. Recapping, and you tell me if there's anything else. Recapping, one thing that I think both Joel and I agree on 100% is the value of emotional intelligence is completely underappreciated within the educational system and within society, but it really does end up being one of the most valuable skills or assets that you will end up with in your life. Self-agency might be required if you're really looking to broaden your spectrum of knowledge and awareness. And with that, becoming proficient in multiple disciplines and the value that is available from becoming proficient in really different and unique skills, it is compounding. There are compounding benefits from doing such a thing. And don't be afraid to look into the different resources. Don't think that there is only that one traditional path, which becomes a state-sponsored funnel into a post-education that is a pretty darn expensive thing. Anything I missed in there?
I think you got it. I mean, this is we're out of the industrial economy. We're out of almost like the information and technology economy. I think we're in the idea economy now. A lot of people have talked about that, and so being able to figuring out your skill set, figuring out, are you a leader, or if you're not a leader, what are your temperaments? How does that fit in with your life? Making sure that all fits. I mean, we've talked about these alternative paths. Maybe that isn't right for you. I don't know. Some people just need to fit in. They really like following a set routine, optimizing things, making them better. That's a beautiful thing. But if you're a little bit weird, then yeah, I think pulling together dissimilar disciplines and learning about the cod fishing industry, whatever, you just have no idea how that's going to inform your life later. But it absolutely will. And the more different places you can pull information from, the better. It's just such an interesting thing. And so, to close it out, I mean, we are in the idea economy. We live in an incredibly privileged time where you can get access to information and to do so many different things. And so to take advantage of that is a great gift. It takes extra work for sure, because you're not just plugging into the system and being told what to do and following their directions. But the reward for that is it's probably just incalculable. It's just such a great thing.
Yeah, almost certainly incalculable. I mean, almost certainly there's no way that you could put a value on the things that are going to become you and how those things are going to impact the life that comes from that moment where you have added these additional skills and knowledge bases and awarenesses. Joel, heck yeah, man.
Yeah. Cool.
What a fun conversation. Thank you so much, and we'll do this again soon.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
All right, man. Cool.
Thank you. How's Optimus going?
Oh, pretty good, pretty good. I'm going to be doing some wholesaling to this one website, and yeah, it's going good. Having fun with it, focusing on that, and family and all that kind of stuff. Trying to keep everybody sane, keep everything together. So yeah, I'm gonna see what time it is here real quick.
You got 8:14.
Perfect. Cool, man.
All right, good. Cool. Thank you. I'll let you get back to
Awesome.
your day. That's a beautiful setup there. I love that.
Yeah, right on. Okay, so did you want to pick out the topic for the next episode then, or what are you feeling?
No, I like that you pick out the topics. How about that? You
Okay.
keep doing topics. I
Okay.
will send my suggestions from now on because
Cool.
to add to the pool, because I know
Yeah.
I haven't been doing that. And I've let so many just go through the filter of the brain and disappear down the drain forever. But I will just, when those pop up, I'll send them to you from now on.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah.
Does that work?
It's good to grab them. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, because they will go away from me.
Yeah, 100%. Same.
Yes. All right. Well, thanks for fitting me in today, man.
Yeah, thanks a lot. See you.
Talk to you soon.
Yeah.